They sent the Omega away because they thought she was worthless. They never imagined she would be the one person the Alpha King could not ignore. The grand gates of the Northern Realm stood beneath a pale winter sky as Emily Carter arrived at the royal palace with a quiet heart and lowered eyes. She had never dreamed of entering a place like this. For most of her life, Emily had learned to stay in the background. She had learned that being noticed often brought disappointment, and being different often invited judgment. As an Omega born into a family that valued status above kindness, she had always felt like the person who did not belong. Her two older sisters, Olivia and Sophia, had everything Emily never had: confidence, attention, and the admiration of those around them. They believed they were destined for greatness, while Emily was simply someone they could send away whenever they needed something done. When the royal palace requested assistance during the winter gathering, Olivia and Sophia saw an opportunity. They did not want to spend their time serving the Alpha King. They believed the task was beneath them. So they sent Emily instead, knowing she would never argue. "You should be grateful for this chance," Olivia told her with a smile that did not reach her eyes. Emily simply nodded. She had heard words like that before. She had been told many times that she should accept whatever place others gave her. But deep inside, Emily still carried a quiet hope that one day someone would see her for who she truly was. The moment she entered the palace, Emily felt the difference. Everything was larger than anything she had known. The tall stone walls, the elegant halls, and the countless people moving with purpose around her. Yet what surprised her most was the silence that surrounded the throne room. Everyone knew the Alpha King was inside. Alexander Whitmore was respected throughout the realm. He was powerful, intelligent, and known as a ruler who carried the weight of his kingdom on his shoulders. Many admired him. Many feared disappointing him. But few truly knew him. Emily entered the throne room carrying a tray of refreshments, trying her best not to draw attention. She expected the Alpha King to ignore her like everyone else had. Instead, Alexander looked up. For a brief moment their eyes met. He noticed something unusual. She was nervous, but she was not trying to impress him. She was not looking at his crown or his position. She simply looked at him like he was another person. That small moment caught his attention. "What is your name?" Alexander asked. Emily hesitated, surprised that he had spoken to her. "Emily Carter, Your Majesty." Her voice was soft, but there was honesty in it. Alexander studied her carefully. He had met countless people who wanted something from him. They praised his power, his title, and his influence. But this Omega seemed to want nothing at all. Later that evening, Emily returned to her assigned duties, believing the encounter meant nothing. She did not know that the Alpha King was still thinking about the quiet Omega who had looked beyond his crown. She did not know that the person her sisters had dismissed so easily had just stepped into a destiny that would change everything. And Alexander did not know why, but for the first time in years, the palace did not feel quite as lonely as it had before. Emily Carter expected the palace to forget about her the moment she finished her duties, but the Alpha King had noticed something no one else ever had. He had noticed the kindness she carried when nobody was watching. The following days in the Northern Realm passed quietly, but for Emily, everything felt different. She continued her responsibilities inside the palace, moving through the grand halls with the same careful steps she had always taken. She did not want special treatment. She did not want attention. After years of being told that she was less important than others, she had learned to make herself small. But Alexander Whitmore could not ignore what he had seen. The Omega who entered his throne room had not looked at him with fear or ambition. She had looked at him with simple honesty. That was something he rarely experienced. Most people approached the Alpha King because they wanted approval, influence, or a place near power. Emily was different. She treated everyone around her with the same respect, from the highest officials to the workers who quietly kept the palace running. One morning, Alexander walked through the palace courtyard and saw Emily helping a young servant who was struggling with a heavy stack of documents. She did not know the Alpha King was nearby. She did not help because she wanted to be praised. She helped because it was who she was. Alexander watched silently for a moment, wondering how someone who had been treated so unfairly could still hold so much warmth inside her heart. Later that afternoon, he asked one of his advisors about Emily. The answer surprised him. "She is from the Carter family," the advisor explained. Her sisters are well known. But Emily has always stayed away from attention. Alexander looked thoughtful. Why? The advisor hesitated before answering. Some people believe she was simply not meant to stand out. Those words stayed with Alexander. Not meant to stand out. He had heard similar judgments his entire life. People believed his title defined him. They saw the Alpha King before they saw the man. Perhaps Emily understood that feeling better than anyone. Meanwhile, Emily received a message from her sisters. Olivia and Sophia wanted to remind her that she was only at the palace because they allowed it. They warned her not to become too comfortable or believe she belonged among important people. Emily read the message quietly, feeling the familiar ache of doubt return. For a moment she wondered if they were right. Maybe she truly was only someone meant to serve others. But then she remembered the way Alexander had looked at her. Not with pity, not with judgment, with curiosity and respect. That small memory gave her a feeling. The palace had always been a place where Emily Carter felt invisible, but now she began to notice something changing. It was not the way people treated her. It was the way she saw herself. For the first time in years, she wondered if the opinions of others had never truly defined her. The quiet confidence she had hidden for so long was slowly beginning to appear. Meanwhile, Alexander Whitmore found himself thinking about the Omega more often than he expected. He had met many people throughout his years as the Alpha King. He had seen those who chased power, those who wanted recognition, and those who carefully chose their words because they wanted something from him. Emily was different. She had no desire to impress him. She did not change her behavior when he entered the room. She simply remained the same person, and that sincerity fascinated him. One afternoon, the palace prepared for an important gathering with representatives from different territories. The event required many preparations, and Emily quietly worked alongside the palace staff. She noticed small details others ignored. She made sure everyone had what they needed. She listened when people spoke. She offered help without expecting anything in return. Alexander observed everything from a distance. He realized that leadership was not only about making decisions from a throne. It was also about understanding the people who supported the kingdom every day. Emily had never held a title, yet she understood responsibility better than many nobles he had known. Later that evening, Alexander found Emily in the garden near the eastern side of the palace. The winter air was calm, and the first signs of spring were beginning to appear. "You spend a lot of time helping others," Alexander said. Emily looked surprised. "I suppose I do." "Why?" he asked. She thought for a moment before answering. "Because I know what it feels like when nobody notices you." Those words stayed with him. Alexander understood that feeling. He had spent years surrounded by people but rarely felt truly understood. As the Alpha King, everyone saw his strength. Almost no one saw his loneliness. "You should not have to prove your worth to anyone," Alexander said. Emily lowered her gaze. She was not used to hearing words like that. "It is easier to believe that when someone else says it," she admitted softly. "But believing it about yourself takes longer." Alexander respected her honesty. She was not pretending to be fearless. She was simply brave enough to admit her struggles. At that moment, something unusual happened. Both of them felt a strange warmth between them, a quiet sensation neither could explain. It was not overwhelming. It was not something they could name. It was simply a feeling that made the world seem still for a moment. Alexander looked at Emily with surprise. Emily felt the same confusion. Neither of them understood what had happened, but both knew it was different. The ancient bond carried within every werewolf bloodline was beginning to awaken. A connection that appeared only once in a lifetime. A bond that could not be forced or created by status. Later that night, Alexander stood alone in his study, thinking about the moment in the garden. He had always believed destiny was something written in old stories. Now he was not so certain. Emily returned to her room wondering why a simple conversation with the Alpha King had affected her so deeply. She still believed she was only an Omega who had been forgotten by her own family. She did not know that the future of the Northern Realm was beginning to shift. She did not know that the Alpha King had felt the same mysterious connection. And she certainly did not know that the person everyone had overlooked was about to become the most important person in his world. The days following the moment in the garden felt different for both Emily Carter and Alexander Whitmore. Neither of them spoke openly about the strange connection they had felt, but neither could forget it either. For Emily, life continued as it always had. She still woke early, completed her duties, and tried to remain unnoticed among the powerful people of the Northern Realm. Yet something inside her had changed. She no longer felt completely invisible. A small part of her wondered if perhaps she had been wrong about herself all along. Alexander noticed the change too. The Alpha King had spent years trusting his instincts, and everything about Emily told him there was something rare about her. The ancient bond between werewolves was not something that could be explained easily. It was a connection that reached beyond status, reputation, or expectations. But Alexander refused to make assumptions. He wanted to understand Emily as a person, not simply as a possible part of his destiny. That was what made her different. She was not someone he wanted to claim. She was someone he wanted to know. Meanwhile, Emily's sisters began noticing the attention she was receiving. Olivia and Sophia had always believed Emily was the least important member of their family. They thought her quiet nature meant she lacked ambition. They believed her kindness was something people would overlook. But now the Alpha King was speaking with her. The same man who rarely showed interest in anyone had started noticing the Omega they had ignored for years. "Do you really think you belong there?" Sophia asked when Emily returned home for a short visit. Emily looked at her sister quietly. In the past, those words would have immediately made her doubt herself. But now something felt different. "I am not trying to take anyone's place," Emily replied. "I am only being myself." It was a simple answer, but it surprised them. Emily had never spoken with such calm confidence before. She was still gentle, but she was no longer willing to believe she had no value. Back at the palace, Alexander prepared for a royal ceremony where different families would gather to honor the traditions of the Northern Realm. Many expected the event to focus on powerful bloodlines and important alliances. But Alexander found himself looking for one person among the crowd. Emily arrived quietly, standing away from the attention as usual. Yet when she entered the hall, Alexander immediately noticed her presence. Not because she demanded attention, because she brought a sense of peace wherever she went. During the ceremony, an unexpected question was brought before the Alpha King. A noble asked what qualities he believed mattered most in those who stood beside the throne. Many expected him to mention strength, influence, or loyalty. Instead, Alexander answered differently. "A person who understands others will always be valuable," he said. "Power can command respect, but compassion creates trust." Emily heard those words from across the room. She did not realize they reflected what he had learned from watching her. After the gathering ended, Alexander approached her. "You seem surprised by my answer," he said. Emily smiled softly. "I just did not expect someone like you to value something so simple." Alexander looked at her thoughtfully. Sometimes the simplest things are the ones people forget. As they stood together beneath the palace lights, the invisible connection between them grew stronger. Neither knew exactly what the future would bring, but both understood that something important had begun. The Omega who had spent years hiding was finally being seen. And the Alpha King who had everything except understanding had found the one person who made him feel truly known. The connection between Emily Carter and Alexander Whitmore continued to grow, but neither of them fully understood how much their lives had already begun to change. For Emily, every day at the palace was still a reminder of the world she came from. She remembered the years when her opinions were ignored, and when her kindness was mistaken for weakness. Yet now, she was beginning to see that the qualities others had dismissed were the very things that made her different. Alexander noticed this transformation more than anyone. He saw how Emily still treated every person with patience, even after experiencing years of being overlooked. He saw how she never used his attention as a reason to look down on others. That was what made her impossible to ignore. The Alpha King had spent years surrounded by people who wanted to stand closer to power, but Emily was the first person who seemed more interested in understanding him than his title. One morning, Alexander invited Emily to join a small meeting with several palace advisors. It was not a formal royal gathering. He wanted her perspective on a matter involving the communities throughout the Northern Realm. Some advisors were surprised by his decision. They wondered why an Omega with no political background would be included in such a discussion. Emily noticed their uncertainty and almost stepped back, believing she did not belong. But Alexander looked at her calmly. "Your thoughts matter," he said. Those simple words gave her the confidence to speak. Emily shared ideas about helping smaller communities feel more connected to the palace. She suggested creating better communication between leaders and citizens, so that concerns could be heard before they became larger problems. The advisors listened carefully. They expected someone inexperienced. Instead, they found someone who understood people. After the meeting, Alexander walked with Emily through the palace gardens. "You were afraid to speak," he said. Emily smiled slightly. "I was afraid people would think I had nothing valuable to say." Alexander looked at her with quiet understanding. "And now?" She looked across the gardens, thinking about everything that had changed. "Now I think maybe I was only listening to the wrong voices." Those words stayed with Alexander. He realized Emily was not becoming someone new. She was simply discovering the person she had always been. Meanwhile, Olivia and Sophia struggled to accept what they were seeing. The Omega they had once dismissed was gaining respect throughout the palace. They had believed Emily would always remain in their shadow. They never expected her gentle nature to become the reason people admired her. When they visited the palace, they saw how others greeted Emily with genuine respect. It was not because of her connection to the Alpha King. It was because of the way she made people feel valued. For the first time, they began to understand what they had failed to see. Emily's greatest strength had never been her status. It had always been her heart. That evening, Alexander stood with Emily beneath the stars overlooking the northern realm. The kingdom light stretched across the valley, creating a peaceful view. "Do you ever wish you had lived differently?" he asked. Emily thought about the question. "Maybe once. But if I had changed everything about my past, I might not have become the person standing here today." Alexander smiled. Her answer reminded him why the bond between them felt so different. It was not built on power or expectation. It was built on two people seeing each other clearly. The ancient connection between them continued to grow stronger, but the most important change was not the bond itself. It was the trust they had created. The Omega who once believed she had no place in the world was finding her voice. And the Alpha King who had always stood alone was discovering that the greatest strength could come from someone who simply understood him. The connection between Emily Carter and Alexander Whitmore had become something the entire Northern Realm could feel, even though neither of them had spoken openly about what it meant. The ancient mate bond between them continued to grow stronger, but what mattered most was not the mystery surrounding their connection. It was the trust they had built through every conversation, every moment of understanding, and every quiet choice to see each other for who they truly were. Emily still struggled with the attention that followed her. She had spent so many years believing she was meant to stay unnoticed that being recognized felt unfamiliar. The palace was filled with people who now respected her, but a small part of her still wondered if they only cared because of her connection to the Alpha King. Alexander noticed her uncertainty. He understood that being chosen by destiny did not automatically erase years of doubt. He had his own experience with that feeling. For years, people had respected the crown before they respected the person wearing it. "You know," Alexander said as they walked through the palace gardens, "being seen by others does not mean they understand you." Emily looked at him quietly. "And do you think they understand you?" The question surprised him. Most people never ask the Alpha King something so personal. After a moment he answered honestly, "Not often." Emily smiled softly. "Then maybe we both know what it feels like." Those simple words reminded Alexander why he valued her presence. She never tried to fix him or change him. She simply understood. As the spring season approached, the palace prepared for a royal celebration that would bring together families from across the kingdom. It was an important event where traditions were honored and alliances were strengthened. Emily was expected to attend beside Alexander, but she worried about how others would see her. She was not afraid of the people themselves. She was afraid that they would only see her as someone who stood near the throne. Before the event began, Alexander found her preparing quietly in one of the palace rooms. "You look worried," he said. Emily looked down. "I do not know if I belong in a place like this." Alexander stepped closer and spoke gently. You have spent your whole life believing you needed permission to belong. You never did. His words stayed with her. For the first time, Emily began to understand that her place was not something someone else could give her. It was something she had always carried within herself. During the celebration, Emily stood beside Alexander as guests arrived from different territories. Many expected to see a powerful Alpha King and a mysterious Omega connected to him. Instead, they saw two people who respected each other. Emily spoke with families, listened to their concerns, and made everyone feel welcomed. Alexander watched proudly as the room slowly changed its view of her. She was not there because destiny had chosen her. She was there because she had already earned the respect of those around her. Meanwhile, Olivia and Sophia watched from a distance. They remembered the girl they had once considered insignificant. They saw that same girl now standing beside the most powerful alpha in the realm, not because she had taken something from anyone, but because she had remained true to herself. Later that evening, Alexander and Emily stood outside the palace beneath the clear night sky. "Do you still believe you do not belong here?" Alexander asked. Emily thought for a moment before smiling. "No. I think I was simply waiting to believe it myself." Alexander smiled because that was the answer he hoped she would find. The bond between them was special, but the greatest change was the confidence Emily had discovered within herself. The Omega who once hid from the world was finally stepping into the light. And the Alpha King who had spent years searching for understanding had found someone who saw him beyond the crown. The celebration in the Northern Realm became a turning point that changed the way many people viewed Emily Carter. For years, she had been known as the quiet Omega who stayed away from attention. She was the person others overlooked, the person whose kindness was mistaken for weakness. But after standing beside the Alpha King during the royal gathering, people began to see what Alexander Whitmore had already understood. Emily was not remarkable because of the mate bond. The mate bond was remarkable because it had connected him to someone like her. In the days that followed, Emily continued learning what it meant to have a voice. She did not suddenly become someone who sought power or recognition. She remained the same person who listened carefully, helped others, and treated everyone with respect. The difference was that she no longer apologized for those qualities. Alexander admired that change. He knew how difficult it was to overcome the expectations placed upon someone. As the Alpha King, he had spent his entire life being told what strength should look like. Emily showed him another version of strength, one built on patience and compassion. One morning, Alexander invited Emily to join him during a visit to several communities outside the palace. He wanted her to see the people of the Northern Realm and understand the responsibilities they carried together. Emily was surprised by the invitation. "Why do you want my opinion?" she asked. Alexander looked at her with a calm expression. "Because you notice things others ignore." During their journey, Emily spoke with families, listened to their concerns, and learned about the challenges different communities faced. She did not arrive as someone expecting respect. She arrived as someone willing to understand. The people noticed immediately. They saw that the Omega beside the Alpha King was not interested in status. She was interested in them. When they returned to the palace, Alexander realized something important. A ruler could create laws, build structures, and make decisions, but true leadership required understanding the hearts of the people. Emily had a gift that could not be taught. She could make others feel valued. Meanwhile, Olivia and Sophia struggled with their own thoughts. They had spent years believing Emily's gentle nature was the reason she would never succeed. They believed the world rewarded confidence, ambition, and influence. But now they saw something they never expected. Emily had gained respect without changing who she was. She had not become colder. She had not become someone who pushed others aside. She had simply stopped believing the cruel words that had followed her for so long. One evening, Emily received a letter from her family. It was not an apology, but it carried a different tone than before. For the first time, they acknowledged that they may have misunderstood her. Emily read the message quietly and felt something she had not felt in years. Peace. She did not need their approval to know her worth anymore. Later that night, Alexander found her in the palace garden. "You seem different," he said. Emily smiled. "I think I finally understand that being kind does not mean I have to disappear." Alexander nodded. He knew those words represented the greatest change of all. The Omega who once believed she had no place in the world had discovered her own strength. The Alpha King who once carried everything alone had found someone who reminded him that leadership was not about standing above others. It was about walking beside them. And as the Northern Realm entered a new chapter, everyone began to realize that the person they had overlooked was the person who had helped them see the future more clearly. The Northern Realm continued to change as more people began to understand the true meaning of leadership, and much of that change came from the quiet influence of Emily Carter. She never expected to become someone the kingdom would look toward for guidance. She had spent so many years believing that her place was somewhere in the background. But now she walked through the palace halls knowing that her voice had value. The greatest surprise was that she had not gained respect by becoming someone different. She gained it by finally accepting who she had always been. Alexander Whitmore watched this transformation with admiration. The Alpha King had once believed that carrying responsibility meant standing alone. He thought a ruler needed to appear perfect, certain, and untouchable. But Emily had shown him something he had forgotten. A kingdom was not built only through decisions made from a throne. It was built through the trust between people. One afternoon, Alexander and Emily attended a gathering with leaders from different regions of the Northern Realm. The purpose was to discuss the future and create stronger connections between communities. In the past, Emily would have stayed silent during such a meeting. She would have assumed others knew more than she did. But this time she listened carefully and shared her thoughts when asked. Her ideas were not complicated. She spoke about making sure smaller communities were not forgotten. She spoke about creating opportunities for people to share their concerns. She spoke about kindness as something that could strengthen an entire kingdom. The leaders listened because they realized she was not speaking from ambition. She was speaking from experience. She knew what it felt like to be ignored, and she did not want others to experience the same loneliness. Alexander looked around the room and saw something he never expected. The same Omega who had once entered his palace quietly was now helping others find their own voices. After the meeting, Alexander and Emily walked through the palace gardens. The flowers were beginning to bloom, and the cold winter season had finally faded. Do you ever think about how different everything could have been? Alexander asked. Emily looked at the path ahead. Sometimes, but I think every moment brought me here. Alexander smiled. And are you happy with where you are? Emily paused before answering. Yes, because I am not here because someone decided I was valuable. I am here because I finally believe I am. Those words meant more to Alexander than she realized. He knew the world had tried to define them both. Emily had been defined by being an Omega. Alexander had been defined by being an Alpha King. But neither title could fully describe who they were. Their bond was powerful, but their understanding of each other was even stronger. Meanwhile, Olivia and Sophia returned to the Carter estate with a new perspective. They remembered how they had treated Emily, and how certain they were that she would never rise above their expectations. Now, they understood their mistake. They had mistaken gentleness for weakness. They had mistaken silence for emptiness. They had failed to see the strength that existed within someone who never stopped caring. That evening, the palace celebrated another peaceful season in the Northern Realm. Emily stood beside Alexander, not as someone trying to prove she belonged, but as someone who already knew she did. The people no longer saw her as the Omega who arrived with nothing. They saw her as the person who reminded them that every individual had worth. Alexander looked across the kingdom and realized the future he once imagined was no longer the future he wanted. He did not want a realm ruled only by power. He wanted a realm guided by understanding. And beside him stood the one person who had taught him that the greatest strength was not found in commanding others. It was found in caring enough to listen. The story of Emily Carter and Alexander Whitmore became a reminder throughout the Northern Realm that destiny was not only about who was chosen, but about who someone truly was. The Omega who once walked through the palace believing she was invisible had become someone whose voice carried hope across the kingdom. Yet Emily never forgot the person she had been before anyone noticed her. She remembered the quiet girl who wondered if she would ever matter, and that memory kept her humble. She knew what it felt like to be overlooked, and she promised herself that no one around her would ever feel that way if she could help it. Alexander had changed as well. The Alpha King, who once believed he needed to carry every responsibility alone, had discovered the value of trust. He was still respected throughout the realm. He was still the leader everyone looked to during uncertain times. But now, people saw more than his title. They saw his patience, his compassion, and the person behind the crown. Together, Emily and Alexander created a different kind of future for the Northern Realm. A future where strength was not measured only by power, but by the ability to understand others. Months after their first meeting, the palace held a gathering to celebrate the unity between the territories. Leaders, families, and citizens from across the kingdom came together. Many remembered the days when they had underestimated Emily. They remembered the shy Omega who entered the palace quietly and expected nothing from anyone. Now they saw someone who had inspired change without ever demanding attention. During the celebration, Emily stood beside Alexander and looked across the hall. She saw people from every part of the kingdom speaking together, sharing ideas and building stronger connections. It was everything she had hoped for when she first began listening to the stories of those around her. Alexander noticed her expression and smiled. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Emily looked around the room before answering. "I was thinking about how different everything feels. I came here believing I had nothing important to offer. Now I see that even small acts of kindness can create something much bigger." Alexander nodded. He knew that was the reason their bond had become so meaningful. The mate bond had brought them together, but it was their choices that made their connection stronger. They had chosen patience instead of assumptions. They had chosen understanding instead of judgment. They had chosen to see each other beyond their roles. Later that evening, Emily walked through the palace gardens with Alexander beneath the clear night sky. The same place where their connection first began now represented everything they had built together. "Do you still remember when you thought you did not belong here?" Alexander asked. Emily smiled. "Yes, but I learned something important. A place does not decide your worth. You bring your worth with you." Those words stayed with Alexander. He knew the kingdom would continue changing, and challenges would always appear. But he no longer feared facing them alone. Beside him was someone who reminded him what true leadership meant. Emily looked toward the lights of the Northern Realm and felt grateful for the journey that brought her here. She was no longer the Omega who waited for someone else to recognize her value. She was Emily Carter, a woman who discovered her own strength and helped others discover theirs. And Alexander Whitmore was no longer only the Alpha King known for his power. He was a leader who understood that the greatest strength was found in compassion, trust, and the courage to let someone truly see you. Their story remained in the hearts of the kingdom for generations, not because destiny had chosen them, but because they proved that even the quietest heart could change the world when it was finally given the chance to shine.